welcome to the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
It's so good to have y'all with us. It's good to be back with the three of you, as it's been a couple of weeks since I've been part of the podcast because of different travel situations and things. We have an exciting topic, or at least one I find exciting, that we're going to discuss today. I hope that it not only is interesting to our listeners, but also helps them to understand our mindset on these topics. And if you agree with us, disagree with us, have questions, there's always opportunity for you to place something in the comments in whichever social media or function you're listening to this on. But what we want to talk about is Gentiles or non-Jewish people within the body of a Messianic Jewish congregation and context. Not in terms necessarily of, and we're really trying to even avoid it in this particular episode, observance of Torah or those kind of things, but their place within the congregation, the validity and value, as Rabbi David said earlier as we prepared for this discussion, for non-Jewish or Gentiles within the scope of a community as grafted in believers. So that's the conversation we want to have, and we're going to share our perspective of this. And we know that's not going to be agreed to by everybody, but it should be. And we know that people are going to think we're right or we're wrong and have that discussion, and we can have that discussion. But I think it's important for us to at least lay down where we stand on this so that we can help people understand, and also to maybe inspire thought, study, and even possible change of perspective to some people. So that's where we're going to hit today. And most people that are around the Messianic Jewish movement for any period of time know that, at least in the United States, most congregations are majority non-Jewish people. They're part of the congregation, they're at the congregation, they're supporting the congregation financially, physically, they're a part of things that are going on. However, we also know that there are Messianic congregations that have a strong delineation line between what Jews and Gentiles can do within their communities. They have their own reasons for that. And we want to kind of talk about that and try to hash that out and see, are we doing something merely for the sake of tribalism, or having a delineation, or are we doing it with an understanding of roles and responsibilities that at times may look exactly the same and at times may look different? So there's where we want to jump off. Would one of you guys like to jump in?
Yeah, I think a big part of the conversation is the reality that there is kind of this almost innate fear, I guess might be the word to use. I don't know that it's the ideal word, but this innate fear in some Jewish people within the Messianic Jewish movement, that if the Messianic Jewish movement has kind of this overrun of Gentiles in the movement, that there's a fear of it becoming like the body Messiah did in the 3rd and 4th century, when it kind of migrated from being a Jewish entity in which Jews and Gentiles were a part of to being something separate from Judaism that Jews had to change who they were to become a part of if they wanted to become a part of it. And with the revival of the modern Messianic movement in the, realistically the 20th or 21st century, with the revival of the modern Messianic movement, I think there's to some degree kind of a hesitation or a fear that feeds into some of the issues that we're trying to deal with today, because of what if this happens again? And I kind of look at it, and I think Rabbi Eric and Rabbi Toby, Rabbi Jonathan have a similar view on it. I kind of look at it as either we believe that this is a divinely orchestrated movement, a divinely orchestrated revival, however you want to word it, or we don't. And if it's a divinely orchestrated thing by God, then man isn't going to be able to rip it apart. And the reality is that I think we tend to do more harm than good. And for me, part of the reason why this conversation is so important is because we all have experiences in our community with people like this. We have a young family in our congregation that have been with us for about a half a year now that have come, they've grown up in the Messianic movement in different congregations, and they're not Jewish. They are coming to CMC. They've been coming for about a half year now, and they were kind of surprised at how open our congregation is to Gentiles, that we're not trying to push Gentiles away or put them in a box or say, these are the things you can do or can't do, that there's a full inclusivity. There's a clear delineation. Being Messianic doesn't make a Gentile suddenly Jewish or a Jewish person suddenly not Jewish. We both have our role and responsibility. So there's that distinction that's there, but it's not a lack of inclusivity. And so one of the things that stood out to Rabbi Toby and I was they made a statement to us that said, I've been in the Messianic movement pretty much my whole life, but this is the first time I've ever felt like I didn't have to explain away why I was here. Like I didn't have to come up with a reason outside of God called me to this. I didn't have to come up with a reason why I was here. And I just think it's a really intriguing in a painful way, the way that sometimes the Messianic movement as a whole kind of interacts with this discussion.
Yeah, I think that we have to talk about two different things as we enter into this. So one is, for instance, the organization, the governing body that we're a part of as a people group, the MJAA, or the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, has a policy that says if you're Jewish, you can be a full member of our organization, and if you're not Jewish, you can be an associate or affiliated member. Associate member, I think, is what they call it.
Honored associate.
Honored associate. And I can understand and agree with that in this way, that if we were the Italian American Association or the Filipino American Association or the Greek American Association, and somebody who wasn't Greek or Italian or Filipino wanted to support, to walk with, to whatever, we would not say to them that you are Jewish or you're Filipino or whatever. You're an honored associate. You're walking with us. You're doing. But there is a huge difference between a people organization that is a humanitarian aid organization, an educational organization, and so on, and a synagogue or community, local community. And while I understand the desire to have membership and non-membership in the MJAA that distinguishes between those who are Jewish and those who are not Jewish for a valid reason, I think that we should not bring that into a local community in the same way. In other words, at our synagogue, there is a clear, we do not have people at our synagogue who walk around going, I wish I was Jewish, who feel less than because they're not Jewish, or in those ways, because we treat people in our synagogue equal with distinguishing roles. Just like the women in our congregation don't walk around going, I wish I was a man, and the men in our congregation don't go around saying, I wish I was a woman. Even though the Bible says there's neither male nor female, it's talking about in blessing, in promise, in provision of Messiah. But there's still men and women in our congregation, and those roles are significant and important and honored. While when it comes to congregational involvement, the men and the women are pretty much equal in what they're involved in and doing. And so I think that those things are important, that we when we look at things within the body, that we shouldn't make your genetics separate you from involvement in the body and the local community, while I absolutely understand the distinctions that are in the independent person or people organization of the MJAA and how they do. Now, I honestly wish things were different, but because of humanity, you have to have certain things that just happen within the greater organization. But congregationally, for instance, in our congregation, if you want to read the Torah and you have learned how to read the Torah and you know the prayers and you know how to read the Hebrew and you've done the work, whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, we welcome you up onto the bima to read the Torah. If you want to be a cantor or a chazan, you're welcome to be involved in that. If you want to have bar or bat mitzvah, you're welcome to, even if you're not Jewish, because what you're making that statement is, I'm placing myself in congregational community as a son or a daughter of the mitzvot. Now, by saying that, you're not saying that as a Jew I'm going to do these, as a Gentile I'm going to do these. There are different commandments that apply to different people, but you're saying I'm putting myself under the governance of God's Torah as a response to my faith in Yeshua, not to earn it or to validate my faith, but because of my faith. So there are two different things, and I know that there are some people who get upset when they look at the website or whatever for the MJAA, and they say, why do you have this distinction? Well, it's a distinction because if you're not Jewish, you shouldn't say you're Jewish. If you're not Italian, you shouldn't say you're not Italian. If you're not Indian, you shouldn't say you're not Indian, even if you're a senator. It's just not the way it should be. But when it comes to congregationally, our love, our fellowship, our unity has to go beyond those divisions.
So we kind of dealt with, not to this degree, but we talked in early episodes of the podcast, we talked a lot about the one new man and the idea of Jew and Gentile becoming one. And one of the things that we discussed extensively is that this podcast is a really intriguing and interesting reality, because we've got two Messianic Jewish rabbis who are Jewish and two Messianic Jewish rabbis who are not Jewish.
And there are people within our movement that would be offended at that statement.
Correct.
You just made.
Yeah, because they're as a matter of fact, both major rabbinic organizations do not give the title rabbi, the ordination of the title rabbi as an organization, to non-Jewish people, the congregational leaders or pastors or whatever, which that's their thing. That is what it is. I do think it's funny though that a lot of times at their conferences they'll have rabbi on the name tag, but that's a different story.
Well, yeah, I've never. It's funny because I know a lot of the people who are ordained as pastor or congregational leaders, and I've never seen that on a name tag.
Yeah. But nonetheless, aside from all of that, we are very adamant about this, and so in our congregations, and I don't know that it was necessarily like either of us were seeking out. We weren't trying to make a statement, we're going to go find non-Jewish assistant rabbis and give them the title just to stick it to the man. Like, that wasn't at all the purpose, nor was it our heart. In fact, at least at CMC, like, you guys have been around a lot longer, Bradam has, and have grown a lot over the years, and so you were definitely at a point that you needed an assistant rabbi, and you needed to build that kind of bench team, if you would. CMC, we weren't necessarily in a place that we need. I mean, I think every rabbi is a place that they need it, but we weren't in a place where it was like a necessity. We have to have this is what. But it was God put the right person in the right place at the right time, and it happened to be somebody that wasn't Jewish, and it was this beautiful thing. And so, looking at that reality that our congregations, both in a practical sense and how we operate as congregations, but also in a leadership sense and how our leadership are made up of Jew and Gentile together. I want to hear from Rabbi Jonathan and Rabbi Toby on, like, because you guys are coming into this both from the church world originally and then growing, kind of becoming part of the Messianic movement for a long time now. And I'm sure that you've experienced different things and have probably walked into some of the walls that a lot of other Gentile believers in the Messianic movement have walked into face first in a painful way. And this isn't hey, let's beat down on the movement or beat down any particular congregation or a negative thing. We just want to, we want to have a conversation. What can we do to make it more welcoming, because God obviously is bringing Gentiles into the Messianic movement, which is beautiful. I mean, Acts 2 and Acts 10 mirror each other, and it was for the purpose of bringing the two together. And so what can we do as Messianic Jewish congregations? And I can only speak to the local level. I'm not in any leadership role in any of the major organizations. So what can we do on a local community level to help foster that reality of inclusivity, validity, and value of Gentiles in the Messianic movement, outside of simply going, hey, you can't do this, but we still want your money, keep giving your tithes.
Right, but while not diminishing the value of being Jewish at the same time.
Correct.
Yeah. Jonathan?
It's kind of funny. I wanted to get and try to keep it to the local level, but my first thought was actually related to the bigger, which was, I kind of wonder if one of the reasons why it's a can be a problem is because of how interlinked the MJAA is with the theological component, the IMCS, because both of them are supposed to be doing very different things, but both of them are so connected that I wonder if sometimes the culture of the MJAA, which is like it would be like any other ethnic club, it's Messianic Jewish people and families who have a story of their own. Kind of like your story when you became a believer in Yeshua. Like, your family held a funeral for you. Like, there are a lot of Jewish families who kick their families out. Remove their families from interacting with them. And so there should be and needs to be a place for Jewish believers in Messiah to gather as Jewish believers in Messiah. So I wholeheartedly support that. However, I also wonder if that culture of, I'll call it a trauma culture. Like, I have no problem calling it, because and with some ways it's a traumatic response. If that carries over into the theological component, the body that's the governing, quote unquote, governing body of the synagogues and fellowships and congregations within the Messianic movement, it probably should not carry over into that, but I think it just does, because it's by default. It's it's who's involved. So, with that said, I think one of the first things that you can do is just not be not try and exclude, because we've talked about that we know there are congregations that they find out you're not Jewish. They're like, oh, here's some very pro-Israel congregations that would be better for you to attend. This probably isn't the place for you. It's like, well, you don't know that. They walk through your doors. And I tend to have a very wherever you are, as long as you're not in sin, wherever you are, wherever you come to, like, that's probably God either has something for you there or is going to take you somewhere else better from that place. So it's to operate on that table of immediately addressing someone who's not Jewish and saying, oh, well, this is probably, there's better places for you to go. It's like, well, maybe not. I don't know. But to tell them that immediately is you're trying to remain exclusive and not allowing God to work with the people that He brings to you, perhaps to hear you teach, to sit at your feet, if you're a rabbi. Second thing I'd say is, allow people to be involved. There should be, there should be no issue with people being able to read from scriptures publicly before the congregation. We every Shabbat we open the Torah, the Haftorah, and the Brit Chadashah, and we allow anyone who's a member of the congregation to read from the scriptures, Jewish or not, doesn't matter. Because they've all gone through the same requirements. They've all agreed to the statement of faith. They've all committed to our community's vision, our purpose, our goals, which is, both to reach the Jewish people with the gospel of Messiah and to build people up and disciple people as followers of Yeshua, to live as He lived, to look what He looked like, to have His heart. And so they've agreed to that, Jewish or non. And so we invite them to read from the scrolls. We invite them to carry the Torah during processions. To do many of the ministries we have around here. Our homeless ministry, many of our children's ministries and classes. We have a new ministry now. We have a year-long class that's for our bar and bat mitzvah age children going through. And, we would not be able to do half as much if we made it to where only Jewish people could lead and do ministry. Because, here's the thing. Some people may be Jewish, but they may not be called to that ministry. God may not have that for them to do. And so, just because you're born a certain way doesn't mean that is what God has for you to be doing. God already has a calling on your life if you are Jewish. It's to be like the nations, and as a Gentile coming to the Messianic movement, and even the greater body of Messiah, all of Christianity. You're supposed to The purpose of the Gentiles largely is to drive the Jew to jealousy for his God. And how do you drive the Jew to jealousy for his God if you're not in and among the Jewish people or around the Jewish people to be seen by the Jewish people? So those are just a couple things that I can think of off the top of my head.
I don't really have any. Honestly, I mean, I don't like to talk about problems without having some kind of solution. The problem is that the problem is the problem in the sense that the type of problem it is. I don't think, it's just my opinion, most of the Jewish believers, Messianic Jewish believers who hold those views of excluding Gentiles, because that's what it is. They never say that. They never say they're excluding Gentiles. They have a very nice way of wording it, and they have really fun explanations. And a lot of it is almost based in this like, you know, what I'm saying is the way they couch it is that we're not excluding you. We don't think we're better. This is about how that God set it up this way and this, that, and I'm like, I really don't believe that most of it comes from this feeling that they are obeying God. I think it comes from a tribal, exclusive attitude of superiority. And yes, I absolutely in 15 years have encountered it. It's sickening. I mean, it is. And it's awful. And I know for a fact that there are really, really just excellent, good people that God has called that end up getting discouraged and leave because there's like a glass ceiling because they're Gentile. And I'm going to say it again, I don't think it comes from this obligation to God. I think it comes from this tribal exclusivity.
Or a traumatic response to...
And for some, a place of spiritual superiority.
Sure.
God chose me. And I'm happy that you're along for the ride. But God picked me, you see. Everybody wants to be number one. It comes from a human condition of wanting to be, wanting to be God's favorite. And the fact is that the way God's love works, which is different from the way we love, like I have a favorite woman in the world, it's Brooke. I'm a human, I think she's better than all the women in the world, as any husband would think about his wife. God's love does not operate that way with us, with his creation. It just simply doesn't. And what's interesting too, I just want to throw it out there, is that Brooke and I, my wife, before I was called into rabbinic ministry, we did worship ministry. And I think one of the most insulting things that I've ever gotten, which was Brooke got it from one rabbi and I got it from another. Two different guys, but they were both Jewish rabbis. I'm a Gentile, and Brooke is a Gentile. And because Brooke is good at playing a piano and can play some Ted Pierce songs and some Joshua Aaron songs pretty good, and I can too. She's better than I am, but I'm fairly adept. We get things like, you got to be Jewish. No, I'm not. No, it's back there somewhere. It's back there somewhere, I know. No. You can't be this good at... No, literally. You can't be this passionate about it and not be.
It's hiding.
You can't be so adept at liturgy and not be. That's in your soul. And I'm like, it's not the Jewishness that's in my soul. It's the God of Israel. It's the God of the Jewish people and Gentiles, as Paul says. Is God not the God of also not the God of the Gentile people? And it sickens me. So what I'm saying is that you have these Messianic Jewish leaders who hold these really hurtful to the movement views about Gentiles, but let a Gentile come along that's really adept at serving in music. Well, I need a worship leader, and suddenly, or I need a good youth leader that can connect with young people, bring them in. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, what about these ones that, they can't serve on the worship team, or might not be able to do that, but they're not... There really is, if you're a Gentile in the Messianic movement that's really good at something, well, suddenly it doesn't matter. Or and that's so. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I've seen when they've had non-Jewish people get up on stage, people who have both connections and money.
Oh, sure.
And they get them up there, and they almost have this need to apologize for being there. Like when they start talking, they're like, "I'm not Jewish," but it's like, dude.
So what you're doing? so what you're doing when you exclude any image bearer of God, which human being, image bearer of God, from the things of God, what you're doing is tantamount to cheapening God's love and cheapening the blood of Yeshua. It's the same price. He paid the same price for me as he did for the Jew.
Yeah,
he paid the same price.
Almost
same price tag.
It's kind of funny. It sounds like, one of Yeshua's interactions where he talks about, you bar the way for others to enter, but neither do yourselves enter. Because people you miss out. Frankly, you miss out when because people wonder, well, why don't we have more young people stepping up into leadership in the Messianic Jewish movement? They might be Gentiles who you happen to run off.
Yes, I know, absolutely, and I know that happens.
Yeah, because I lost my train of thought. Air conditioning shut off.
While you try to track that down again, I want to throw something in real quick, and I'm going to throw a bone out to my good friend Rabbi Jacob Rosenberg again, who we mentioned briefly a couple of episodes back. And I'm hoping we're getting ready, getting things set up to start having some guests on the show from time to time, and I'm hoping that he can be one of the ones we bring on soon. But Rabbi Toby and I, on the way over to Pensacola for recording this morning, we're listening to one of Rabbi Jacob Rosenberg's messages from Adat Tikva in the Chicago area, Deerfield, Illinois, and in this message, this is in his series on love that we talked about a few weeks ago briefly, but in this message he briefly talked about the parable in Yeshua's parable in the Gospels about the wedding, and how they sent all these invitations out, nobody responded, and so he said, okay, we'll go out and just get anybody you can and bring them in, because the feast is ready, just get anybody and bring them in. And he said, that's the Messianic synagogue, right? That's what we're like. Our purpose, our heart, our goal is to reach the Jewish people with the good news of Messiah. But if they're not responding, we're not going to stop. We're going to open the feast up to everybody, because that's what this is about. Ultimately, it's about everybody. We need to bring everybody. And like Rabbi Jonathan was saying earlier, the purpose as a Jewish believer, like, just because I'm in a Messianic Jewish ministry role, just because we are in a Messianic Jewish congregation whose primary objective is to reach the Jewish community with the good news, doesn't change my individual personal responsibility as a Jewish person to be a light to the nations. That's still my primary objective in the body of Messiah, in faithfulness to the Lord, is to be a light to the nations. And likewise, the nations brought into the Messianic community, brought into the body of Messiah, their primary objective is to drive the Jew to jealousy for his God. Or another way you can word that is to be a light to the Jewish people, to carry, more specifically, the light of the ultimate Jewish person to the Jewish people. And so in a Messianic Jewish congregation, I think one of the reasons why, as Rabbi Eric alluded to earlier, the majority of, especially in America, the majority of Messianic Jewish synagogues are predominantly Gentile. I think the estimates are the average Messianic synagogue in the U.S. is somewhere between 15 and 30% of the congregation is actually Jewish. Now, there are a handful that are more than that. Like when we were with the congregation in New York, because of where it was, we had a higher percentage of Jewish people than 30%. Yeah. It wasn't it was like 50% or something like that, but still, there are certain areas where you're going to have more. But nonetheless, if the average congregation is 15 to 30% is actually Jewish, and the rest of the congregation are Gentiles brought in, then who do we think we are, telling them, hey, this thing that the Lord put on your heart, this way that the Spirit of God is moving in your life, you know what? You should probably shut that down a little bit, because there's this glass ceiling you're never going to break through in this community, and this is not right. You've got your place and we've got our place, and this is, and it's in my opinion, it's absurd. I mean, look, again, I get it, and I also want to say that in kind of reference to some of the things that were said here, but also something Rabbi Jacob said on his sermon is, look, I've grown up in the Messianic Jewish movement as a second-generation Messianic Jewish believer. There are a lot of battles and conflicts and tough things I've never had to go through, right? I give respect and adoration to all of the rabbis and all of the Jewish believers that have gone before me, who very literally, in order to follow Messiah, like my father, in order to follow Messiah, walked away from their family, put Messiah above everything.
Yeah.
Right. And I understand when you're coming from that background and suddenly all of a sudden, hey, God's calling me back to Judaism and Messianic Judaism, because a lot of these guys they came to faith in the church, and later in life, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, God brought them into Messianic Judaism, and then they come into Messianic Judaism. It's like, okay, I'm back where I belong. This is my thing. And all of the pain, like you were saying, it was a trauma culture, all of the pain, all of the anguish. And look, they paved the way for where we are today. Like, no doubt, the generations that came before me in the Messianic Jewish movement paved the way for where we are today. But the movement has grown in a distinctly different way than I think a lot of them thought it would go. Like, I think there has always been this hope and this desire and this passion to see thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Jewish people coming to faith instantaneously in our community, like an Acts 2 experience in every single Messianic synagogue, and that hasn't happened. And why? I don't know. I don't pretend to have the answers to that. And I'll also say that in a lot of ways, I know we don't want to admit it, the church is still better at reaching Jewish people in a lot of ways. That's just the truth of it. And there are things we can learn from that. And I think a big part of it is because they're inclusive with Gentiles in their community.
They definitely are better with that.
That's a thing. And so, but the reality is that we are not as effective at reaching the Jewish community as we should be. And I believe, this is my thoughts, take it, leave it, I don't care. It is what it is. My thought is because we are not being authentic to the community God has given us. We're not being authentic and valuing the Gentiles that are part of our community equally as the Jews that are part of our community. We're not being authentic and giving validity to the calling that the Lord has put on the heart of the Gentiles in our community in the same way we do to the Jews in our community. And until we're willing to actually put that one new man mindset foremost in what we do as a congregation, I don't know that we will see Jewish people come into our congregations, coming to faith in Yeshua the way that we desire, because it takes both the Jews being a light to the nations and the nations driving the Jew to jealousy, or being a light to the Jews, for them to come in. Right? So I tell people in our congregation, for every Gentile or every Jewish person that comes into our congregation, Zechariah 14 says that there will be 10 that'll grab a hold of the tzitzit or the end of the garment of a Jew and say, I know that God is with you, take me, I want to meet him, right? My paraphrase, kind of the little Martian, take me to your leader. But we wear four tzitzit. It could be 40-1. We know minimum 10-1, could be 40-1. And if that's the end time picture, if that's what it's going to be in the end, and we know in the beginning that's how it was with Jew and Gentile leaving Egypt together, then what makes us think that these 4,000 years in between, it's not supposed to be that way too? Yeah. What makes us think that these 2,000 years in between the resurrection, ascension of Yeshua, and now it's not the same? And so for me, I think that there's this necessity for us to realize the validity that it takes both for a Messianic synagogue to be effective in what it is. For every Jew that comes into my congregation, there should be 10 or more Gentiles that come in. And for every 10 or more Gentiles that come in, that opens up the door for another Jew to walk in, because there's this back and forth
symbiote
of light.
Relationship.
Correct.
Yeah, I want to throw four things out real quick. One is, I want to just make this clear that while Rabbi David and I are Jewish, and Rabbi Toby and Rabbi Jonathan are not Jewish, and we all call each other Rabbi, neither Toby nor Jonathan are trying to push their way into being Jewish or identify as being Jewish.
Not at all.
That's not their thing. So I just want to say that one of the things that Jonathan and I were talking about earlier was a visit that he had to the local Reformed temple. They were having a Yom HaShoah event, and he walked in with his lovely wife, Catherine, and their local rabbi from the Reformed temple came up and introduced himself, and he was very excited that this young couple were there, very excited that they, and was talking to them. And as soon as Jonathan said that they were Messianic, his demeanor changed, his face changed, his personality changed. You could see that all of the excitement that this rabbi had for this person being in his congregation building had left the building. It was, sucked out by some, nuclear explosion. The EMP bomb had gone off, and all power was gone from that relationship.
Like a sabot round had gone through the building. Just
and we need to be careful as Messianic leaders that when non-Jewish people come to our congregation, that we don't act that way.
Right.
That the conversation isn't first, are you Jewish, but first, do you know Yeshua? Mm-hmm. And where's your calling, and how did you get here, and those things. The second thing I wanted to say was, and David alluded to this just a minute ago, when Israel was led into the Promised Land, they were led in by one Jew and one non-Jew, Joshua and Caleb, and they didn't seem to have a problem with that situation going on. And the last thing I wanted to say was that there are some people who say if a non-Jewish person participates in something that is identifiably Jewish, that it will dilute the identity of the Jewish person. In other words, if a Gentile wears a kippah, it dilutes the identity of a Jewish person. Or if a Gentile wears tzitziot or a talit, it dilutes the identity. Now, I want to say this, that first of all, if that's true, then we need to stop putting kippah and talit on non-Jewish people at events and things when they show up. But second, if you go to...
And he's referencing ceremonial things at conferences and events and stuff.
If you watch when President Trump or whoever goes to the Western Wall, which is the holiest synagogue in the whole world, when they walk up, they put a kippah on him, they'll put a talit on him, all this will happen. So it doesn't seem to be a thing. And to put it into real terms, when I go to a kosher deli, when I go to some place that serves Jewish-style food, like the Kosher Cajun, which is a Glot kosher restaurant, or even 2J's or something like that, where they have Jewish-style food.
Yeah.
Nobody sits there and says, if a Gentile eats matzo ball soup, has a bagel with lox and cream cheese, and has a side order of whitefish, that somehow that's going to make Jewish people less Jewish because a non-Jewish people is doing something that's identifiably Jewish. And I think that if we, and this is something that we try to focus on, and I'm not knocking anybody, I'm just being real, we try to focus in our community with establishing that the genealogy that we're most concerned with is Yeshua's. And then secondary to that is whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, and that if your primary is Jewish or non-Jewish, you've missed the boat.
Yeah.
And that you can be Jewish and abide by Jewish identity markers and be Jewish. And you can be Gentile and participate in Jewish identity markers like Shabbat service, like wearing a kippah, like wearing a talit, without anybody confusing or making you feel as if you should now be Jewish because you've done that. That our role, my role as a teacher, as a rabbi, is to be able to talk to people like Rabbi Jonathan before he was a rabbi and say, look, doing these things doesn't make you Jewish. It makes you grafted into something that is identifiably Israel and biblical. And that we need to be able to teach somebody so that we don't have to have in the back of our mind a fear that if we have 60% Gentile and 40% Jewish in our congregation, that somehow if a Gentile says amen, which by the way is a Hebrew word, or hallelujah, which is a Hebrew word, or Baruch Hashem or something like that, that's somehow going to dilute the Jewish identity of a Jewish believer, rather than encouraging them to walk alongside the Jewish believer in full confidence that God didn't drop them in the wrong basket, that God created them to be a non-Jewish believer, a Gentile believer in this body, and that wasn't an accident or an error or I dropped in the wrong column. That's what God's intention was for them to be. And if we end up with that unity like that, with an identifiable role and difference, that Rabbi Jonathan or Rabbi Toby aren't trying to be Jewish, they're trying to be faithful to the biblical, to the community, that will alleviate the fear that something is going to happen like did in the second, third century when we see the dilution of Judaism. By the way, and it wasn't that the Gentiles diluted Judaism to get rid of, so that they could be more Jewish. It was the Gentiles diluting Judaism to take the Judaism away from the faith in Messiah.
Yeah.
And I want to point out to that degree of what you were just talking about before, dealing with the early church or the birthings of the early churches. The reality is we see this imagery not just with Joshua and Caleb, which, by the way, the first judge of Israel was Caleb's brother.
Yeah.
So the first judge of Israel, when you go back to the book of Judges, the first judge of Israel,
there's 2 or 3 that
was a Gentile.
That are Gentiles. Yeah.
But in particular, the first one, that's the thing that stands out to me. But aside from that, we see that with Titus and Timothy. Right? When Paul was ministering, he made sure that Timothy was circumcised because Timothy was actually Jewish and hadn't gone through Brit Milah.
Yeah.
And that was a part of being Jewish. But Titus wasn't Jewish. So Paul didn't have Titus get circumcised, thus presenting himself as Jewish. But Timothy and Titus both ministered in a Jewish ministry to Jews and Gentiles alike, and were both equal and both valid and both valued in a very extreme ways. Matter of fact, Paul references both of them as his sons.
Yeah, and the writings to Titus are included in a Jewish book without concern that we're writing to a non-Jew that's going to dilute the Jewishness of the rest of this book.
Yeah, I think I guess after the conversation, I think the first thing I said is I don't know if I have a solution. I think the solution, I just think it looks different depending on where you're at, because I think that the problem manifests itself in different ways. I've seen more outright and robust situations where you have rabbis telling non-Jewish people in their synagogues, oh, sure, you can come every week. Sure, you can tithe, but you can't get your kids bar bat mitzvah. Or you can't wear a talit, or you can't wear a kippah. So I think that's really the most robust. Well, the worst case scenario is you can't even come into my synagogue. Here's some churches, which it does exist, people.
Yeah,
and then I think you got the other, still bad, but you let them come in, but you just don't let them participate in everything. It's bad. It's still spiritually gross.
Yeah. And equally bad is and I'm sorry for interrupting, but equally bad is the congregation that welcomes the non-Jewish or Gentile in with an understanding that by becoming part of the congregation, they have somehow become Jewish.
Yeah.
So there's that both ends. There's the one that rejects Gentiles out of hand, and there's the other that says a Gentile ceases to be a Gentile if there is.
And and then there's other situations like you have some Messianic congregational leaders that just full pedal to the metal, full on, turned up to 11, berating Gentiles because for their lack of understanding about the importance of Israel in the Scriptures, and it's this constant barrage. And I'm like, there's a reason why they walked into a Messianic synagogue. Could it be because they're realizing that? So why do we have to beat them over the heads all the time about how, hey, I want you to understand that God chose Israel first? I mean, you do understand that, right? You understand that, right? You understand that, right? I've been going to CMC for, really, all the time for a year since I moved here, but I've been involved in the congregation for a couple of years. I've never heard Rabbi David feel like he's had to remind his congregants the order that God brought salvation to the world and that he chose Israel first. Why is that something that we need to... So that's another thing. Yeah, it's like, I just want you to understand you're Gentile. Just want you to understand where this all came from. Jesus said salvation came from the Jews. I just want you to know Jesus said that. Yeshua said that. And I'm like, they know that. So why don't you encourage them, bring them in and teach them? Some of them don't understand. Yeah. But you don't make them feel stupid for being Gentile.
Yeah.
That's really,
Well, that's actually an extremely powerful statement, and I appreciate you saying that.
Oh, thanks. What I meant, just the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing, the whole concept of don't. You're preaching to the choir, so to speak.
Right.
If they're in the synagogue, they're there because they at least get some kind of window or door is opened. And you don't have to beat them up as if they're outside waiting for them to come in.
I mean, I've heard rabbis talk to people like they're outside picketing against Israel. And these are people sitting in your congregation, probably giving money to it, probably paying your salary. And you're going to just hang on this. I just want you to know that you have been grafted into something that we did. And I'm like, dude, chill. We're wearing talits, bro. We get it. Anyway, so just that, and so these are the different levels that I've seen it.
Yeah,
you know, it's all the same kind of ridiculous.
And let's be honest, most Messianic guys couldn't survive without the money that the Gentile, people in attendance bring in.
Yeah, and not just the money, but the support, the effort.
But that's what I'm getting is we can't survive without their money, so we definitely shouldn't think we can survive without their involvement.
Yeah, their hands and their feet. Yeah, because it's and you miss out on those. Like I was saying earlier, you miss out on those gifts when you run people off like that. When you exclude people from being involved, and just my mother said something to me the other day that I kind of is like it's true, but it kind of goes to show that God leads us to where He's going to want us. My mom was talking about they've kind of been attending their First Baptist church kind of off and on now. Again, they hadn't been attending church for a while just because there wasn't really a church that really seemed to be good for them where they're living, and so but they've been there now, and my mom kind of told me, she was like, I kind of wish we had been in somewhere like First Baptist a little more while you were in high school, because your life may look very differently right now, like seeming to imply that I would be in Baptist ministry if I had been we had been in the Baptist world more often. And I said, it kind of made me chuckle. I was like, maybe, but I was like, God has me here. God has me in the Messianic movement. God has me living a Messianic lifestyle, teaching and leading along with Messianic Judaism, because those giftings and abilities God had already given me. I was going to use them one way or the other, whether it was in a Baptist context, a Methodist context, a secular context, but
Unitarian.
Sure. I mean,
it's one step lower than secular. Is that what you're saying?
We're going down. The ship's going down. No, but
for looking for the Titanic.
That's right. Oh gosh, please don't.
I think that as we wrap this up for this episode,
we've lost control.
I think we have to go back to something that Rabbi David started with when he said that some of what goes on is based upon fear of something happening that previously happened, and bringing us back to what happened when the Christianity left Judaism. And I think that we need to be careful when we allow fear to direct us. The scripture says to fear Adonai, to fear God, and that means fear. It doesn't just mean awe. It means be afraid of His might, of His power, and all that. But that's the only thing we should be afraid of. And if God brought people to our community, then we shouldn't be afraid to give them the liberty to walk in the calling that God gave them. And that if we're not careful, our fear of something happening will keep what God wants to happen from happening. That our fear of Gentiles stealing, robbing, overwhelming, whatever the idea is, diminishing, devaluing the identity of the Jewish people within our congregations, that's not a fear God instilled.
Right.
When the non-Jewish people were in the synagogues worshiping, when Paul was running around, Paul wasn't afraid that those non-Jewish people were going to make the synagogues seem less Jewish, because they were in the synagogue on Shabbat, hearing the Torah and walking alongside the non-Jewish people. God brought those people there. And I think we need to be careful that we don't allow fear of returning to something or something happening that happened in the past to keep us from walking in the freedom that God has given us to walk in unity today. And that when we line up that way, when we understand that there are differences, that just like there's men and women, there are Jews and Gentiles, and that's the way it's going to be until the return of the Lord and after. But that shouldn't stop us from walking in unity, and it shouldn't stop us from allowing the gifts and talents that God has instilled in people to be used within the community.
Yeah.
In aligning with that. Again, Gentiles eating matzo ball soup doesn't make them Jewish, and nobody watching them eating matzo ball soup thinks it makes them more Jewish, or that it makes the Jewish person that may have cooked the matzo ball soup less Jewish because they were involved.
But it can make a Jewish non-believer in Messiah go, what are you doing?
Why are you eating matzo ball soup?
Let me tell you why, and there you go.
Right.
But because I think wholesale Gentiles aren't being empowered the way they should in the Messianic movement, it's not moving the way it should.
Yeah, many of the Jewish people, including myself, have come to faith because of a Gentile believer reaching out to us. Right. And part of that reaching out was us saying, what are you doing that for? Why Passover? Why is a Gentile eating matzah? Why are you doing this? And so, well, my Messiah was Jewish and is Jewish, and my, I'm grafted into Israel. And what do you mean so it incites that jealousy, especially, my grandfather watched my wife, who it turns out through her family she's actually genetically Jewish, but we didn't know that until a few years ago when she followed up through genealogy charts and found out her adopted situation was to a Jewish family, or from a Jewish family, but she was always considered non-Jewish, and there wasn't a problem. But my grandfather watched her lifestyle, and he actually said the words, "You make me jealous because you live this more fully than I do. You make me, you force me, you incite me to renew, to do more, to be more, because of the way you're walking this out." And I can't think of a better testimony for a non-Jewish believer than you caused me to draw closer to the God of Israel and to my people.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and I just as a couple of final quick things, I just throwing it out there, just think it's kind of ridiculous that a lot of the Messianic leaders that propagate this kind of view are married to non-Jewish women, which I just think's another layer of ridiculous, just another layer of ridiculousness to put on there. Yeah. But anyway,
so how do you go home each night?
Right. How do you feel about that? Anyway, so but also I just want to say, and with what Rabbi Eric says about giftings and stuff, the giftings of the Lord that He gives to His children are not a Jewish brand of gift; it's God's brand of gift. Yeah. So I can't imagine the opportunities that Messianic leaders miss when they are looking for I want a Jewish worship leader, and you might have the worship leader you're supposed to have sitting there; they're just not Jewish. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think just to end, the thing that always encourages me, and I give to you all to be encouraged as well, with trying to handle this problem, is that our master was the one himself who said, when interacting with the centurion who came and asked that his master would be healed, a Gentile, that he never before had he seen such great a faith in all of Israel.
Right. Yep. So with that said, we thank you guys for listening to our banter today. I'm sure we rocked some boats. I'm sure we encouraged a bunch of folks. And if you have anything you'd like to add to the discussion in whatever direction, feel free to post those comments on our social media threads, and we'd love to interact with you a little further. Thanks, and shalom. Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.